Hi there VC, it's Steve Whitty here, another video. I think one of the better pieces of news that came out in 2018 was the fact that Roxy music deservedly got voted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And given that this has happened, I thought, why not make a ranking Roxy music video? Now, the albums I'm ranking are the studio albums. No comps, no live albums. So this is purely the 8 studio albums that Roxy Music put out prior to them initially splitting up in 1982-83. I don't think they actually ever split up. I just think they just stopped recording albums. I don't think there was any official, and there have been reunion tours that have happened infrequently during the preceding years. Sorry. So I think as an entity, I don't think Roxy Music could operate anymore. I'm pretty sure now that Perry does his own thing, Andy Mackay's doing his own thing, and Phil Manzanera has been working with David Gilmour. Paul Thompson's currently drumming with Lindisfarne, a band from the neck of the woods that he came from. I'm not going to give you really a breakdown of the history of Roxy Music. All I'm going to say is that as a group, they're probably one of the most influential bands of the 1970s. I think it's the fact that you listen to their music, but when it started out, there was elements of like hard rock, prog, but there was the glam image as well, which stood them apart from other bands of that era. And you've got a master songwriter in Brian Ferry. You had Brian Eno in at the time. Then you got Phil Manzanera on guitar, and then Andy Mackay, who is actually an oboist, and then became a saxophonist later. But the fact that he could weave that oboe into some of the tracks just made it stand out. And then in Paul Thompson, you had a powerhouse drummer as well. The only thing was the bass players that sort of drifted in and out. So, without further ado, I'm sort of prattled on. Let's start the ranking. So, as I said, there are 8 Roxy Music albums, studio albums. So, coming in at number 8 is Manifesto. This was the 6th album, and this album sort of signified a bit of a comeback. It'd been 4 years since Siren, and sort of band sort of drifted. Brian Ferry was doing his solo thing, and Phil Manzanera and Andy Mackay were doing solo projects as well. And Brian Ferry decided to get the band back together. And on bass, he got Gary Tibbs from the Vibrators. I think sort of a nod to the fact that there was a whole punk new wave thing had happened. And in a way, this is not a bad album, but I think it's probably their weakest album. And I think where it sort of falls down is I think it's not sure what direction it was going in. It sort of harks back to the old days, trying to hold a little bit of the punk new wave thing as well. But then there's the nod to the direction they were going to go in. And the first single, Trash, was sort of like trying to be the old Roxy Music with a hint of new wave, where Dance Away, the second single, became sort of hinted at the direction they were going in. And it's really when Dance Away it was a big hit in the UK, number 2, I think, in the singles chart in '79. I think sort of sowed the seeds in the direction they were going to. And it is no coincidence here that when they released the follow-up single, Angel Eyes, it sounded more in the dance away vibe than it did from the album track, which is more of a sort of rockier edge to it. And I think, as I say, it's not a bad album. I just feel it's the weakest album that they put out. At number 7, I've chose Siren. They're out the 5th studio Roxy music album, as they'd like to make a note of on the album sleeve. This came out in 1975, and this is got Jerry Hall is on the cover, who at that time was the part was going out with Brian Ferry. I think this album is the weakest of the opening 5 albums. The albums they released on Ireland, produced by Chris Thomas. The best known track is Love Is the Drug, which was top 5 in, I think, both the US and the UK. It was by far their biggest single. Other standout track, Both Sides Burning. But I got the feeling listening to this, I'm not sure whether they were running, but Brian Ferry was running out of ideas. There were a lot more collaborations. Andy Mackay had a co-write. Eddie Jobson was a co-writer. Mantanera also co-wrote some of the songs. And just it doesn't sound as cohesive as the first few albums. What I would say is, it's not a bad album. The bass player on this album was John Gustafson. During most of the albums after the original album, bass player left, they had a session who would play on the album and probably toured with them. So they, in a way, that their lack of bass players, the Spinal Tap, we're Spinal Tap with drummers, it was bass players with Roxy Music. The next album, number 6, I've plumped for Flesh and Blood. This came out in 1980, and the reason I've gone for this, and this probably could have been the weakest album of the lot, but I felt what has made it rank it higher is the singles that came off this album were really top notch. Same old scene. Oh yeah, on the radio. They do a half decent cover on the Midnight Hour and Over You. They were such great singles. I think the only thing that lets it down a little bit is that there is a really poor version of 8 Miles High, but then again, I've never heard actually anyone do a really good cover version of 8 Miles High. So this also was the first album that marked it. They didn't have Paul Thompson. He wasn't happy with the direction they were going with Manifesto, and he decided to leave the band. In fact, you had three. It says a lot about Paul Thompson that it took 3 drummers to replace him. Alan Schwartzberg, Andy Newmark, and Simon Phillips all played drums. In fact, bass player Gary Tibbs pretty much sort of sidelined a little bit because you got Alan Spenner and Neil Jason also provide bass on this. And Paul Carrick, I forgot to mention, who played keyboards on Manifesto, also plays keyboards on this album as well. I think it is, as I said, it potentially could have been the weakest album, but I think the singles helped save it. At number 5, I ain't going to cover anything up, I think you've all seen it. It's Country Life, the 4th album. There you go. And I think it's still some strong songs on this album. The 3-4 is this great opening track on here. The single All I Want is another strong song. I enjoyed Casanova. Everyone knows the cover art. It's pretty famous, infamous, whatever way you want to look at it. The bass player on here was again John Gustafson. So it was probably, I think, the first time he played on there. For those who don't know, John Gustafson was a bass player from Liverpool and he was the bass player in a band called the Big Three, who were around the same time as the Beatles, and many had predicted that they would be bigger than the Beatles. Unfortunately, it never quite worked out, and it for them. So Gustafsson became quite a well-known, famous session bass player. I think he even played with the Ian Gillan band. Yeah. As I say, there's some good songs on here, some strong songs. I've mentioned those. Out the Blues, another one, another good song. I think it's. I think it's. I think it. I was quite happy to put this at number 5. At number 4, I've chose Stranded, which was the third album. But this was the first album without Eno. And funny enough, Brian Eno always says that this is his favourite Roxy album. And he says purely because I think it may have been because I was no longer involved. I had no emotional attachment to it. It is a great album. Eddie Johnson joined on keyboards and violin. It sounded less experimental. I think this big change when Eno left was the experimental set had gone. But it's also the first album that Ferry had decided to collaborate with other members of the band. On the first 2 albums, he had written all the songs. Whether that because felt frustrated and maybe thought, I need to keep the rest of the band sweet and get them involved. The 2 best songs. Street Life was the single off here. Great song, great single. And you got Song for Europe, which now you listen to it. Obviously it depends on your political point of view. With Brexit coming up, it just really sounds even more mournful now. And then you got Mother of Pearl as well, and just the great opening to that track, and then it just drifts into the main part. Absolutely wonderful. There's some really wonderful moments on this album. At number 3, I've gone for Avalon, and this album came out in 1982. This was the final Roxy Music album that they released, and I think this culminated the sound that Ferry was looking for with the previous 2 albums. It's just an enchanting album. It's just a great listen. The title track is just absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I remember at the time, 1982, I was going to be 16, 17, really despising it. Despising the songs, the singles that came out. Main thing was Take a Chance with Me. And more than this, they were the singles. But it's as, I suppose, mate, because what do you know when you're 16, 17? As my tastes are mellowed, suddenly found, actually, this is actually really good. And I'm really pleased to have ranked this at number 3 because I think it's absolutely cooking out. You've not listened to it and you think, this is a bit too smooth. Actually, listen to it again. There's some really good moments on this. At number 2, I've plumped for the debut album, Roxy Music, which came out in 1972. It was a toss-up, really, on which album would become the top album. And the reason why this album, or debut album, I ranked it number 2, is it is an expression of intent. You open up. Remodel is really just that. This is who we are. With all the solo parts in it, and the album does feature Graham Thompson, who was the original bass player with Roxy Music, and who left just as the album was released. And this is where the band decided to go with the whole point of just having session bass players. Side 1 is really the key to this album. You've got Remodel, Ladytron, Is There Something, 2HB. And I think this is probably what separates it from being number 1, is that the weaker songs are on side 2, in my opinion. But as an album, you've got the cover art, the glam, the model. Let's see if I've got the name in here. Carrie Ann I didn't say give a full name, but you've also got all the guys. They just look totally out of this world. Phil Manzanera and his studied glasses. It's just, I don't think people were quite prepared for it. I mean, they actually supported Alice Cooper when he came on the back of his Schools Out tour and blew him off stage, basically. There was more to, they could cut it live as well. That was which made them stand out. So that leaves number one, and that's For Your Pleasure. Absolutely, where I think the debut album has a weak side too. This is just absolute. It's just the most consistent of albums. There isn't a duff track on this album. The band at that point was coming together. Ferry was writing the songs. The band were supplying all the music to, were top form playing it. Do the Strand. What a single that was. There you go. Have a look at the band there. Do the Strand. Strictly Confidential, Editions of You, in every Dream Home and Heartache. You get this mournful track that ends up, suddenly Ferry just then puts in the caveat, it's about a blow-up doll vinyl, or maybe a vinyl Vera, I don't know. And it's in a way it's shocking because somebody who actually would sing about that. And then on side two, Bogus Man, Grey Lagoons, For Your Pleasure. It's just absolutely wonderful. John Porter played the bass on this album. Absolutely. This is an Ireland original. Really is a top-notch album. If it's the one album I said you'd need to get a Roxy Music, this would be the album. So that's my ranking of the Roxy Music albums. What do you think? I'm going to be more than happy for you to leave a comment and tell me I'm wrong. It's all about opinions. That's why we love music so much. So if you're stumbled up across the channel and you're new to the channel and you like what you see, click on the subscribe button. I've had a little bit of a spurt on subscribers. So I'm happy with that. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Always love the interaction. And feel free to leave a comment because I will get back to you. I do appreciate it. That's what it's about, really, the interaction. So, VC, until the next video, take care of yourselves, keep spinning, more importantly, keep smiling.